Hello. Today I'm going to tell you two stories about princesses. The first one is called The Princess and the Pea. What a lot of fuss was made about that. Once upon a time, there was a prince who, when he grew up, wanted to marry a princess. Nothing very remarkable about that, you'll say, and I agree with you. But this young prince wanted to be absolutely sure that the princess he married was a real princess. As a young man, the prince's days were filled with all the good things of life. He went hunting and fishing, and he attended balls and other state functions. He had a wonderful life. And all the time, the feeling that he must marry a real princess grew stronger and stronger. Eventually, the prince decided that he must go and search for this real princess, and so he set off. He traveled to this country and to that, uphill and down dale, in winter and in summer. But although he met many princesses, there was always something the matter with them. One was too tall, and another too small. One was too sad, and he thought another was far too cheerful, and no princess was ever quite right. Also, the prince was never quite sure whether they were real princesses or not, and this mattered to him most of all. Having gone right round the world in his quest, the tired prince at last came home again. He was very sad because he did so want to marry a real princess. When he came into the castle, he told his father and mother, the king and the queen, that he had not been able to find a real princess. They were very worried. He was the prince and would one day rule the kingdom, and they felt he should have a queen. The prince went back to his old life of pleasure and plenty, and as the weeks turned into months, there was still no sign of a real princess for him to marry, and the king and queen became more and more worried. One night in autumn, there was a terrible storm. Lightning flashed and thunder roared, the wind blew and rain poured down. No one in the castle could remember such a dreadful night. Late, when all were abed, there came a knock at the door. The knocking went on for some time, for because there was so much noise from the storm, no one could hear the tap, tap, tap on the great castle door. Finally, it was the old king himself who got out of bed, tramped across the great corridors and halls, down to the main door. There, standing outside in the pouring rain, was a lovely lady. She might even have been a princess, but she was so wet it was difficult to tell. Her hair was so wet that the water from it was running down her face. Her clothes were so wet that the water was pouring out of them. Her shoes were so wet that the water was running in at the toes and out of the heels. Without more ado, the king flung open the door and helped the girl inside. "Lady," cried he, "you shall not stay out here in this weather. Come, enter my castle." She came into the castle out of the wind and the rain, and he slammed the huge door shut behind her. As she stood there, dripping water, all she said was, "I am a real princess." The king looked hard at her and brought her into the great hall. The prince and his mother had been woken by the storm and had heard the king go to the door. Now they sat in candlelight, awaiting his return. When the king entered with the girl, the prince could not believe his ears as she repeated that she was indeed a real princess. He helped her off with her sodden cloak. "But where did you come from? Why are you out on such a night?" he cried. The girl stood there, dripping water in the hall. Finally, all she said once more was, I am a real princess. Now, the old queen heard the girl say that she was a real princess, and although she didn't mention anything, an idea came into her mind. Somehow, she thought, I must find out if this girl is telling the truth. In a great state of excitement, the prince summoned servants from their slumber, and chambermaids entered to prepare a bath for the real princess. Oils were brought to scent the water, and herbs for her to drink to stop her catching cold. The women fussed round the girl and looked after her with great care. While the princess was being bathed and dressed in dry clothes, the queen went to see about a bedroom for her. In a great bedchamber, the queen had all the bedclothes taken off the bed. Then she put a pea under the mattress. The servants were all sworn to secrecy and instructed to fetch more mattresses. The queen commanded that 20 mattresses be placed on top of the pea. Whew. The queen then had all these feather beds piled on top of all these mattresses. Now, as you can see, this is a pretty large bed. It would be difficult for anyone to lie on top of it. But the queen insisted that the princess must sleep on top of them all. Now we shall find out if you are a real princess, she said to herself. At long last, when the servants had finished drying and clothing her, the princess was brought to the bedchamber and tucked up in bed by the queen herself. Everyone went back to their rooms. The young prince, eager and hopeful that this girl was a real princess, just as she said she was, found it hard to sleep, and although the storm had died down, he lay awake for hours, unable to rest. In the morning, the old queen went to see the princess. "How did you sleep, my dear?" she asked. "Dreadfully," replied the princess. "I hardly slept a wink all night." The servants were amazed when they heard this, for of course they were nearby listening. "What was the matter?" asked the old queen. "I do not know what was in the bed," she replied, "but there was something hard in it. Now I'm black and blue all over." As the princess clambered down the ladder to the ground, she was not in a happy mood. She couldn't quite understand why the queen began to smile. "Do you think it's funny that I did not sleep well?" she said. But the queen knew that this was a real princess because she had felt the pea through 20 mattresses and many feather beds. Only a real princess could be as sensitive and tender as that. With great joy, she told the servants to dress the princess. Best clothes were brought out for her as the queen ran from the bedchamber in search of her son and husband. When she found them, the prince was filled with joy as the old queen told him that the girl indeed was a real princess, though he didn't ask his mother how she knew. The prince was so happy that he began to dance. And his father, the king, was so happy for his son that he began to dance as well. In fact, soon everyone in the castle was dancing and singing because at long last the prince had found a real princess. As for the pea, it was placed in a museum. We've only got it on loan. It'll be going back to the museum, I promise. Needless to say, everyone lived happily ever after.
A pea, a little green pea, popped into a bed so easily. A pea, and nothing less could prove a real princess.